Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to the Steve Tiberius Donoghue Book Club. Your April infestation is this book, The Hemlock Cup by Bethany Hughes, subtitled Socrates, Athens, and the Search for the Good Life, which means that in terms of reading Flapdoodle, the subtitle is indicating there's going to be rocky roads ahead. Reading about Socrates will be fine. We know of Socrates as a literary creation, exclusively. Not as a historical figure, but certainly he was a real historical figure. And we know a lot about Pericles in Athens. And Bethany Hughes is a terrific writer on stuff like that. And if you've read her book on Istanbul, probably loved it. It's the search for the good life part that's going to cause problems with this book, because any book about Socrates and Athens is almost certainly going to have to be about philosophy. Which is, those of you who know my BookTube channel, you're going to know that I don't get along with philosophy. But for the first two acts of this book, we're reading, this is set up very neatly into 4 acts. So we're reading the first 8 acts. We're reading the first 2 acts for last week, and then the next 2 acts for this week. I'm going to try and catch up a little here. Maybe I'll do a video in the middle of the week. But for most of the beginning of this book, we're dealing with purely matters of history, because Bethany Hughes wisely understands that she has to tell us about the setting before she can tell us about the man or the writings that he inspired. So we get a lot about Athens and its place, its rise to power, this amazing intellectual ferment that was happening among the upper classes, the worsening frictions and threats of extinction at the hands of enemies, both at home and abroad, either Persia or Sparta. We get all of that, and I hope that you'll agree that it's done really, really well. And there are some interesting narrative devices that Bethany Hughes uses throughout. She chooses, for instance, to interpolate all throughout the text excerpts from Socratic writing, from Aristotle or Xenophon, stuff that is in italics. It's in her own translation, and it's interpolated with the text to periodically give us almost the sound of a guided tour, almost the sound of someone giving color commentary. I think I largely ignored that the first time that I read this book. This is my second time reading this book, and I think it's remarkably effective. I'll be interested to know what you're thinking of that, of those italicized interpolations. And this also gives Bethany Hughes a chance to tell us about what we can best extrapolate was Socrates' personal history, which is also fascinating, because even if a lot of it is speculation, a lot of it is probably not, and the speculation itself gives you an idea of what the world was like. Like, for instance, Bethany Hughes talks about Socrates' father in a passage where she is guessing that he is a stonemason on the Acropolis, working on the Acropolis. And she gives us this passage here. We are told that Socrates' father, limed, dusty, was one of the stonemasons in the hammering city. Oh, that is wonderful. That's just wonderfully done. A man kept busy and in pocket by the can-do spirit of the day. Alapake and its neighboring districts, from that day to this, have a reputation as a zone where marble masons live. At the bottom of the hill, the masons are still there, cottage industry compact, displaying their wares around the gates of the modern city's first cemetery. Today, their work is decorative, comforting the bereaved, who want to do honor to the 21st century dead with a hand-carved sparkling stone. But in the 5th century BC, the stone worker was the creature who would build, brand Athens. So Socrates' father, Sophroniscus, would have been in demand. The exquisite mourning Athena relief was carved. The foundation was sunk on the northwest slopes of the Acropolis. The bronze Athena was cast by master artist Phidias, and so on. We get details like that, where it's extremely colorful. It is, to use a little bit overused term, novelistic, but it works. It really works to make this all feel real instead of dry or dusty. And the same thing is true when she gets to extrapolating about what Socrates' own youth would have been like. Specifically, when she gives us a passage, I want to read you here. I won't stay along with this long overdue reprise of the Steve Tiberius Donoghue Book Club. I'll try to keep better on a schedule next time. She gives us a wonderful description of 5th century Athens red light district, where Socrates was probably spending time. It's her extrapolation that he is. Uh, uh, she writes, for instance, about this neighborhood and about Athens culture just in general, especially for the upper class. She writes about the phenomenon, the cultural phenomenon, the cultural fad of beautiful young men, of ephebophilia, of young men in their late teens who are finally blossoming in the various gymnasiums and athletic contests. They are in need of polishing. They are goods on the marketplace to older men, not to older women, not to young women. Instead, it's to older aristocratic men who this culture at this particular moment uh, allots them a degree of social cachet depending on how they act out the role of squire and mentor to one of those beautiful young men. I've mentioned this before, this arrangement a few times. It's a little bit hard to get your head around uh, because the closest equivalent that we have today is older American, let's say American businessmen, although the pattern holds true in China and in Russia too. But let's say older American businessmen getting a young piece of arm candy, an 18-year-old beauty queen or something like that. But that comparison doesn't really hold up all the way. In fact, it doesn't go much further than that because first, the arm candy is female. That pattern has almost not budged in terms of a greater social acceptance of homosexuality. And second, maybe more importantly, there is no aspect that that young woman is going to benefit socially. Society is laughing at her, and if she has two brain cells to rub together, which she usually does, she's going to know that. There's no pretense at all that he is going to do anything like shaping her. That's not the cultural view of that arrangement at all. And that makes it completely different from the arrangement that Bettany Hughes is trying to talk about here, where there is a cultural acceptance that, okay, you've still got it. You're in your late 30s, or even, God forbid, your early 40s, but you've kept trim. You've retained your looks. You've achieved a place of honor in society, maybe done a little military service. And as a result, you've still got it if you can if you can acquire one of these young men in the gymnasium and win his favor, so that basically he chooses you as his older man, his mentor figure. I mean, there was sex involved, although there was a huge amount of social opprobrium if the sex was happening in the wrong direction. The power in the couple had to belong to the older man. I know this is difficult to talk about on a family channel, but some of you will know what I mean. If I hesitate, any phrase that I use now is going to be charged with double entendres, and I love double entendres, but let's just innocently use the phrase "the upper hand." The older man in this relationship was expected to be calling the shots in and out of the bedroom. And if rumor got around in Periclean Athens that was not true, that an older man had I don't even know the word anymore. We don't have a word for it anymore. Affianced is the wrong word because there was never going to be a marriage. The older men in question are all married. They have children. It's not a question of that. It's something separate from that. Whatever the word is, if rumor gets around that the older man in one of those gymnasium relationships is the submissive member of the pair, that's social shame, regardless of how beautiful the young man is. And this, it's difficult to explain this. This was a big deal in Periclean Athens. This was a big deal. This was a predominant ethos in a way that has almost not been duplicated in history. Certainly not in the exact same way. There are a couple of duplications that you can find in extremely intellectual and also martial societies. So periods in medieval Japan, for instance. But it's rare for this pattern to crop up. It's rare. And it was central to the world view of a lot of the people that we're going to be reading about in this book. We might not associate, you don't, for instance, associate Pericles himself with this, but he certainly would have. It was part of his world, and it was certainly part of Socrates'. You don't have to read, even if you've only been exposed to a couple of Plato's writings about Socrates in school, you will probably know about the exchanges that are given between him and Alcibiades, a character called Alcibiades, who is also profiled in the chapters that we're reading today. And Alcibiades is very explicit that was an element of the attraction of Socrates, maybe not in the present day, but in the past. It seems a little bit odd at first because we're made aware very early on and persistently in all the Socratic writings that Socrates himself was ugly. But that didn't necessarily ruin the arrangement. Not necessarily. It was more a question of social standing than it was beauty to beauty. I'm not doing a good job of explaining this, but because I'm trying to pick my way around sensitive subjects. There's a lot written on the subject. I'm sure that you could read about. You can read about it in this book as well. But Bettany Hughes is nodding in the direction of that whole subculture when she talks about the red light district of Athens and what Socrates might have done there. We get a wonderful passage. Let me read this to you. Love, sex, death, it was all here. See how wonderfully inviting that is? It's accurate, but it's not written in a snoozy academic way. From the 12th century BC onward, this had been a burial ground, and in Socrates' day, the main thoroughfare was still lined, as far as the eye could see, with the dressed stone graves, simple affairs, not the showy painted tombs that smelled of aristocratic power, but something more democratic. The dead were listed in tribal groups. A discreet political cemetery housed public burials, but still the fallen of all degrees were honored. Orders celebrated the virtues of brave soldiers. Specially organized athletic games sent the dead off to Hades. It was in this noisy pleasure/death ground that Socrates, we are told, frequented as a young man. The Kerameikos, that's the name of the district, is a key clue to his story and to the story of Athens' golden age. These visceral, vacillating lanes, nooks and crannies, were his ethical nursery. This is a zone where a man's basic needs, as well as his more elevated tastes, were catered for. Socrates makes it clear that his philosophy comes from observing and living in the good, the bad, and the ugly place we humans call home. Despite what the world throws at us, his simple, infuriating, inspiring message is that however mongrel and challenging our surroundings, we should identify and embrace the good and pleasant in life. And that last bit of flapdoodle is the danger that I was talking about here, that periodically, if you're going to talk about Socrates, periodically you're going to write ridiculous stuff like that. You're going to write, periodically you're going to overclaim. I hoped when I first knew about this book that Bettany Hughes would be the first author ever in the history of the world not to overclaim for Socrates, but no, he brings it out in people. I have no idea why. Of course, the dude bros live and breathe overclaiming for philosophy, but something about Socrates brings it out of even people who aren't dude bros. I have read books that just unambiguously say absolute nonsense like Socrates taught us how to think, or Socrates blazed the way for rationality, or Socrates gave us our humanity. ridiculous stuff like that. This figure seems to provoke that. I don't quite know why. All of it, for your future reference, if you encounter flapdoodle like that in a book about Socrates, or about Plato, or about Aristotle, just keep in mind, you might not like the fact. Those claims are all wrong. If those claims are right, if a person or a group of people or an intellectual environment created the way we all think or blazed a path for our rationality, it wasn't 5th century Athens. You might not like it any more than maybe I like it. You might rile at the idea, and you might know some famous public speakers who would rile at the idea. But nevertheless, if we're going to lay those kind of claims, it's going to be Christianity, not Platonic philosophy. It's not going to be this. It's going to be Christianity, which nobody wants to do. It's going to be St. Augustine and Anselm. But we don't have to deal with that. We don't have to worry about it because we're just dealing with this book. And in this book, mercifully, Christianity does not yet exist in the world. In this book, the Hebrew God barely exists. So Christianity, no one has ever thought it. No one has ever said that word. No one knows anything about it. All those people are still hundreds and hundreds of years to come. So we don't have to worry about that. that is the segment of this book that we're doing today. Is Bettany Hughes shaping for us, for our view, the world and the man? And she's not done. Another chunk of the next two acts of this book uh, deal with more formative years of Socrates, his time in the military, his time learning his place in society and getting married to his wife and whatnot. So we're gonna forge ahead. It's gonna be a little sloppy because I missed a weekend. That's never good in a read along, in a book club. You don't want to miss a weekend. But I'll be back next weekend. We'll jump ahead to where we're supposed to be and stay there. We'll stick to the schedule after that. But of course, I want to know, those of you who are doing this Steve Tiberius Donoghue book club, if those of you who have got this from your library or found a copy at your Goodwill or whatever, are you enjoying this? I'm enjoying it a lot more the second time, even than I did the first time, and I liked it the first time. So I'm hoping the same thing is true for you. I'm hoping it's another winner, and maybe that it's teaching you things that you only glancingly touched on in high school or college. That would be an absolute bonus, because this stuff is enormously important, even though I think anyone who comes in contact with it immediately starts making ridiculous airy claims for it that don't have any grounding in fact. But we'll get to that. But anyway, I'm going to wrap up this catch-up Steve stream at our Steve Tiberius Donoghue Book Club. Sorry very much for missing last weekend. I will try not to miss next weekend. I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.